Hello, my name is Heath Calder, but to my family I am just Granddad, the quiet old man in the corner. For 40 years I was a professor of Romance languages, but in my own home I became a ghost. It was at my grandson's birthday dinner. The air was thick with laughter I wasn't part of. My daughter-in-law, Morwenna, leaned over to my son, her voice a honeyed poison she thought I couldn't understand. Este viejo es un estorbo. Solo vive para controlarnos. This old man is a burden. He only lives to control us. I didn't flinch. I just savored my soup, a slow smile hidden behind my spoon. The game was on. You see, I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to fight. I am a man of words, and words, when used precisely, are the sharpest weapon. The next morning, I began my quiet war. It started with her coffee, the way only I knew how to make it. Then her favorite plate, small silent absences that spoke volumes. Then I began to write. Little notes in a flawless, elegant Spanish she could never hope to master. On the mirror she stared into every morning. Los fantasmas escuchan mejor en silencio. Ghosts listen best in silence. Tucked into her purse, una carga educada es aún una carga. A polite burden is still a burden. I watched her find them. I watched the color drain from her face, the confident mask she wore for my son begin to crack. She thought she was whispering secrets. She was actually handing me the ropes to her own undoing. And when the final note is found, the life she built by underestimating me will come crashing down. This is not a story about revenge. This is a lesson in respect. And class, my dear, is about to be in session. To everyone who supports this community, thank you. Your words mean more than you know. And if this is your first time here, do me a favor, like, subscribe, and hit the bell. You're not just joining a channel, you're joining a family that believes no one should suffer in silence. Now, let me tell you my story. They call me Granddad. It's a title that should be warm, woven with the soft threads of storybooks and shared secrets. Here, in my son's house, it is a label for a piece of furniture. The old chair in the corner that occasionally needs to be fed. For 40 years, I stood before lecture halls of bright young faces. I taught them about the soul of languages, how Italian sings, how French argues, how Portuguese yearns. I showed them that Spanish isn't just a tool for ordering food on holiday. It's a river of history, carrying the blood of Moors and the dreams of conquistadors. My name, Heath Calder, meant something once. It was on book spines and faculty doors. Now it is a whisper, an afterthought. When my Ilara passed, the light went out of the world. The big, old house we'd shared was no longer a home. It was a museum of a life I could no longer live. So, when my son, Garrick, offered me their spare room, I clutched at it like a drowning man. A chance to be near family, to hear the pitter-patter of my grandson Eamon's feet, to not die alone. I didn't know I was trading one kind of solitude for another. Here, I am a ghost. I drift from my bedroom to my chair. I learn the schedules of the house so I can be out of the way. I make myself small. I perform the part of the harmless, fading old man because it seems to be the role they have written for me. My daughter-in-law, Morwenna, is the director of this quiet play. She has all sharp, modern angles and a smile that never quite reaches her eyes. She speaks to me in the slow, loud tone one uses for a simple child or a foreigner. Did you have enough to eat, Heath? Are you warm enough in that chair, Heath? She has never asked what I think. She has never wondered what goes on behind the eyes she refuses to meet. Garrick, my own boy. He's become a stranger. He's wrapped up in his work, in the whirlwind of his life, in the orbit of Morwenna's strong gravitational pull. He sees me, I think, but he doesn't look at me. He sees the idea of a father, not the man slowly crumbling inside. My world has shrunk to the four walls of this beautifully appointed prison. My greatest excitement is the morning ritual of making the coffee. It's a small thing, a tiny act of service that lets me feel, for a few moments, like I belong here, like I have a purpose. I use the good beans, grind them fresh. I know Morwenna takes hers strong with 1 sugar. Garrick likes his with a splash of cream. I serve it in their favorite mugs, the ones I bought them for Christmas one year. It is my daily, silent offering, a plea for a place at a table where I increasingly feel like a forgotten guest. I look at the family photos on the mantel. There I am, on the edges, a blurred figure in the background, the ghost in the room. I often wonder if, when I am finally gone, they will look at those photos and see the empty space where I stood, or if they will simply be relieved that the furniture has been rearranged. It was Eamon's 7th birthday. The house was a riot of noise and color, filled with shrieking children and the cloying smell of sugar. I love the boy with a ferocity that aches, but these events are a special kind of torture. I am a landmark the party flows around. I found my usual seat at the far end of the dining table, a plate of untouched cake before me. I was performing my part, smiling vaguely, nodding when it seemed appropriate. I was lost in the memory of Garrick's 7th birthday, how Elara had made a castle cake, how we'd laughed as he blew out the candles, how the world felt whole and secure. That's when I heard it, the shift in tone. Morwenna was sitting diagonally across from me, leaning in towards Garrick. Our grandson, Eamon, was on her other side, distracted by a new toy. The general din of the party created a perfect, intimate bubble for them. For her. She smiled, a beautiful predatory thing, and placed a hand on Garrick's arm. Then she let the poison fly, wrapped in the language she believed was her secret weapon. Este viejo es un estorbo. The words hit my ear, and for a heartbeat my brain refused to translate them. It was the sheer audacity, the venomous calm. Solo vive para controlarnos. This old man is a burden. He only lives to control us. Time didn't stop. It crystallized. I saw the tiny crumbs on the tablecloth with impossible clarity. I heard the individual notes of a child's laugh from the other room. I felt the weight of the porcelain spoon in my hand. And I saw my son. My Garrick. He didn't flinch. He didn't look shocked or angry. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. A sigh. A silent agreement. That was the second dart, and it went straight into my heart. The world rushed back in, louder than before. The blood pounded in my ears. A hot, sharp shame washed over me. This was what they really thought? This was the truth that lived underneath the polite questions and the forced smiles. I was a burden, an obstacle, a controller. Every small thing I did to help, the coffee, the tidying, the offers to read to Eamon, was being twisted into an act of manipulation in their private conversations. My first instinct was a raw, animal rage, to stand up and overturn the table, to roar in the voice I used to quiet 100 students, to tell them exactly who I was and what I thought of their cruel, small-minded assessment. But I didn't. I looked down at my soup. I focused on the slow, steady rhythm of my breathing. I felt a strange, cold calm settle over the burning shame. The professor in me, the strategist, awakened. They had given me a gift. They had revealed their hand, believing I was too blind to see it. I took another spoonful of soup. I savored the taste, the warmth, and behind the shield of my spoon, I allowed a slow, thin smile to form. It felt foreign on my face, a relic from a time when I was powerful. The game, indeed, was on. The party eventually ended. The goodbyes were said, the mess was half-heartedly tackled. I moved through it all like an automaton, my smile fixed, my responses automatic. Lovely party. Yes, he's growing so fast. Good night, sleep well. When I finally closed the door to my room, the silence was absolute. It was a different silence from the lonely quiet I was used to. This was a charged silence, the quiet of a battlefield after the first shot has been fired. I walked to the dresser and picked up the silver-framed photograph of Alara. It was taken on our 40th anniversary. Her hair was silver, her face lined, but her eyes still held the same brilliant, mischievous light they'd had when we met. "Oh, my love," I whispered, my thumb tracing the cool glass over her smile. "What have I become?" I had come here a grieving man, yes, but a man, a scholar, a person. I had slowly allowed them to sand down my edges, to quiet my voice, to pack away my life into this single room. I had become the ghost they saw because it was easier than fighting for a space. Morwenna's words echoed in the stillness. A burden, a controller. The rage returned, but it was no longer a wildfire. It was the bed of hot embers that remains after the flames have died down, intense, focused, and capable of forging steel. I looked around the room. My room. It was neat, impersonal. A guest room. The books on the shelf were few, mostly gifts. My real library was in storage. My notes, my research, the manuscript I'd been working on for a decade, all boxed up, waiting for a tomorrow that never came. I had sacrificed everything. My home, my independence, my work. And for what? For the privilege of being tolerated? For the honor of being secretly despised in the home I had helped my son purchase? I thought of Garrick's nod. That was the wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. My own son. The boy I taught to ride a bike. The young man I stayed up with talking about philosophy. The son whose education I had poured my life's work into funding. He had heard his wife call his father a burden, and he had agreed. A profound grief, deeper than any I had felt since Alara's passing, washed over me. I wasn't just grieving for my wife anymore. I was grieving for my son. The relationship I thought we had was an illusion, a memory I had polished until it shone, while the real thing tarnished in front of me. I sat in the dark for a long time, Alara's photo held tightly in my hands. The embers of my rage glowed, and in their light, a plan began to form. It wasn't a plan of shouting or confrontation. That was their world, the world of loud, obvious power. My world was the world of nuance, of subtext, of the power that lives in the space between words. They had used language as a weapon against me, a secret dagger. It was time I showed them what happened when a master of that weapon decided to pick it up. The ghost was ready to speak, and he would do it in a whisper they could not ignore. The dawn broke, a pale, gray light seeping through the blinds. I had not slept. I had sat in the armchair all night, the silhouette of my life passing before me, not in a panicked rush, but in a slow, deliberate review. I was not the frail old man they saw. I was Professor Heath Calder. At 22, I had debated the finer points of Cervantes' irony with grizzled academics in Madrid and won. At 35, I had delivered a paper on the subjunctive mood in medieval Galician Portuguese poetry that had silenced a room of my peers. Language was not just my profession, it was my landscape. I understood its topography, its hidden valleys, and its treacherous cliffs. They had forgotten this. No, worse, they had never known it. To Morwenna, I was just Garrick's father, a man from a generation that didn't travel, that didn't learn. She wore her functional Spanish like a cheap necklace, something shiny to show off. She had no idea that the language she used to mock me was a palace I had lived in for half a century, and I knew every secret passage, every dusty, glorious room. The cold clarity that had come over me at the dinner table hardened into a resolve as solid as granite. I would not fight them on their terms. I would not stomp and shout, giving them the excuse to label me as the difficult, controlling old man they already thought I was. No, I would fight on my own terrain, the field of silent implication, the battlefield of nuance. My weapons would not be loud, they would be absences. They would be perfectly crafted sentences left in the dark like traps for the mind. I stood, my joints protesting, but my spirit felt clearer and sharper than it had in years. The grief was still there, a heavy stone in my chest, but it was now the foundation for something new, something formidable. I walked to my small desk and took out a sheet of heavy, cream-laid paper and my fountain pen, a Mont Blanc Alara had given me for our 30th anniversary. It was a relic of my old life, a tool for crafting thoughts worthy of permanence. I uncapped it. The smell of ink was the smell of my own resurrection. I would not write a rant. I would not write an accusation. I would write a simple, undeniable truth. A truth that would land in the fertile soil of her own guilt and paranoia and grow into a choking vine. The first phase of the war would be one of subtraction. I would remove the small daily comforts I provided. The invisible architecture of my servitude would crumble, and she would feel the draft. The second phase would be one of assertion. I would speak, but not to her face. I would speak to her conscience, in the language she thought was her shield. I looked at my reflection in the dark window. The eyes that looked back were not the eyes of a ghost. They were the eyes of a strategist. The embers had found new fuel. The professor was preparing his lesson plan. The kitchen was my sanctuary, the one place where my presence was still a daily, functional reality. This morning I would make it my first battlefield. I heard Morwenna and Garrick moving about upstairs. The routine was as familiar as a liturgy, the creak of the floorboard above their bedroom, the rush of water in their ensuite, Garrick's heavy tread on the stairs. I began my work. The grinder whirred, shattering the morning quiet. I measured the water, poured the grounds into the filter. But today I measured for one. I listened as Garrick came into the kitchen, yawning. "Morning, Dad." "Good morning, Garrick," I said, my voice even. I poured the rich, dark brew into a single mug, my plain, white one. I did not reach for the tall, ceramic mug with the geometric pattern that Morwenna favored. I did not spoon a single measure of sugar into it. I simply stood by the counter, sipping my coffee, watching the steam curl into the air. Garrick hovered by the machine, confused. Is there more?" "In the pot," I said, gesturing with my mug. "Enough for you." He frowned, looking from the coffee maker to me. The unspoken question hung in the air. "What about Morwenna's?" He was so conditioned to my service that its absence was a louder statement than any complaint I could have voiced. He said nothing, just poured his own coffee, his brow furrowed. A few minutes later, Morwenna entered, already dressed for her day, a bright, expectant smile on her face. "Morning, boys. Something smells good." She went directly to the counter where her mug always waited, filled and ready. She stopped. The space was empty. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second before she recovered, turning to the coffee pot herself. "Oh, did we run out of beans?" she asked, her tone light, but I could hear the faint strain. "No," I said, my voice calm. "I made a pot." She looked at the pot, then at my single mug, then at Garrick's. The math was simple and damning. There was enough for two, not three. A faint pink flush crept up her neck. She said nothing, busying herself with making her own drink. The ritual was broken. The first thread had been pulled. I moved to the toaster. I put in one slice of bread. My bread. When it popped, I buttered it and placed it on a napkin. I did not set the table. I did not lay out her favorite plate, the one with the blue rim. I did not put out the jar of marmalade she liked. I stood at the counter and ate my single piece of toast, drinking my coffee, a spectator to their newly disrupted morning. Garrick was visibly uncomfortable, shifting his weight. Morwenna was silent, her movements just a little too sharp, the clink of her spoon against her mug a little too loud. The air was thick with everything that was not being said. I had not spoken a word of reproach. I had not mentioned the dinner. I had simply stopped. I had withdrawn the invisible tribute I paid for my place in their home, and the void I left behind was roaring. I finished my breakfast, rinsed my mug, and placed it in the dishwasher. "Have a good day," I said, and walked out of the kitchen. I did not look back. I didn't need to. I could feel their bewildered silence pressing against my back. The first move was complete. The silent war was underway. The withdrawal of comforts was the opening gambit, a psychological feint. Now came the main assault. I retired to my room, the Mont Blanc and my cream-laid paper waiting. This required precision. The tone had to be perfect. Not threatening, not hysterical, but utterly, chillingly knowing. It had to sound like a truth that had always existed, simply waiting for her to discover it. For the first note, I chose the refrigerator. It was the heart of the household, a place she visited dozens of times a day. I wrote in my most elegant academic cursive, the script I used for formal correspondence. Los oídos viejos oyen más de lo que crees. Old ears hear more than you think. I did not sign it. I simply affixed it to the refrigerator door with a simple magnet, right at eye level. A statement of fact. A seed. I positioned myself in the living room, a book open in my lap, a silent sentinel. I heard her come down for a mid-morning snack. The refrigerator door opened. There was a beat of silence, a long, frozen moment. Then the soft rustle of the note being pulled from the door. I could picture her standing there, reading the words, her brain scrambling to compute. Was it Garrick? A joke? One of her friends? The flawless grammar, the formal script. It wouldn't fit. I heard her footsteps, quick and light, moving to the base of the stairs. "Garrick," she called up, her voice tight. "Did you leave a note on the fridge?" His muffled, distracted reply came from his office. "What note?" "No." The silence that followed was thick with her confusion. I turned a page in my book, the sound crisp in the quiet house. The next note was for a more intimate space. I slipped into their bedroom when the house was empty. The air smelled of her perfume and his cologne, a scent that once would have felt like family and now felt like foreign territory. I placed the second note on her pillow where she would find it last thing at night. Una carga que cala no es tonta. A burden who stays silent is not a fool. This one was more direct. It took her own poisonous words, burden, and reframed them, giving them power. It stated plainly that I was not the fool she took me for. That night I heard her go to bed. I was in my room, my door open a crack. I heard their door close. Then, a few minutes later, it opened again. Her footsteps hurried down the hall to the bathroom. I heard the faucet run. She was splashing water on her face, trying to wake up from a nightmare that was, in fact, very real. The following day, I left a third note, tucked into the cover of the novel she was reading on the nightstand. Los fantasmas escuchan mejor en silencio. Ghosts listen best in silence. It was the final piece of the triangulation. It named me, the ghost, and it stated my power. She was living in a house with a ghost who could hear her every word, a ghost who could write, a ghost who was now, unmistakably, watching her. The hunt was on, and she was the prey. The change in Morwenna was swift and stark. The confident, dismissive woman began to fray at the edges. She started jumping at small sounds, the click of my door closing, the hum of the dishwasher finishing its cycle. She began to speak in hushed tones around the house, then would catch herself and force a brittle cheerfulness that was more unsettling than the silence. I became a student of her unraveling. It was a grim, fascinating study. She began to scrutinize Garrick with a new, paranoid intensity. I saw her watching him as he made coffee, her eyes searching his face for a sign, a tell. She started testing him, speaking to him in rapid, colloquial Spanish about mundane things. What to get for dinner, a message from a friend. He would respond with his basic, halting vocabulary, and I could see the frustration and confusion on her face. It wasn't him. His Spanish was clumsy, utilitarian. The notes were the work of a native speaker, an artist. She even confronted her sister, Tamsin, who was visiting. I was in my chair, a ghost, as always, as Morwenna pulled Tamsin into the kitchen, her voice a low, urgent whisper. "Have you been leaving those stupid notes? Is this your idea of a joke?" Tamsin's bewildered denial was genuine. "What notes? Morwenna, what are you talking about? I don't even have a key." The house, once her domain, her stage, had become a prison of her own making. Every shadow held a potential message. Every silence was an accusation. She was living in a psychological thriller, and she had just realized she was the protagonist, not the audience. She looked at me differently now. The glances were no longer dismissive, but furtive, searching. She was trying to see past the frail exterior to find the architect of her terror. I met her gaze once over the dinner table. I didn't smile. I didn't frown. I just looked, my eyes holding hers for a second longer than was comfortable before I turned back to my meal. She looked away first, her fork clattering slightly against her plate. The confident mask was gone, replaced by a pale, nervous tension. The burden she had so carelessly named had shifted from my shoulders to hers. She was carrying the weight of her own guilt, her own paranoia, and the terrifying, dawning realization that the man she had written off was infinitely more complex and dangerous than she could have ever imagined. The war was not fought with shouts or lawyers. It was fought with perfect grammar and the terrifying power of the unspoken. I had turned her own weapon against her. She had used Spanish to create a wall, to exclude and insult. I was using it to tear down the walls of her reality, brick by silent, elegant brick. She was trapped in a maze of her own design, and I was the one holding the map. The ghost was no longer silent. He was speaking in a whisper that was shaking her world to its foundations. If you have made it this far, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. Now, let's get back to the story. The tension in the house had become a physical presence, a thick fog that everyone breathed but no one acknowledged. Garrick moved through the rooms with a bewildered frustration, sensing the shift but unable to locate its source. Morwenna was a live wire, her nerves exposed. She flinched when I entered a room. She scrutinized every piece of mail, every scrap of paper. I had become the predator in the undergrowth, and she could feel my gaze even when she couldn't see me. The final note was the keystone. I had saved it for the moment of peak vulnerability. I slipped it into the pocket of her favorite cream-colored cardigan, the one she always reached for when she was feeling unsettled. The note was simpler than the others, a single, devastating line. El respeto no se pide, se gana. Respect is not requested, it is earned. It was the ultimate indictment. It stated that her behavior had forfeited any claim to the respect she so clearly felt was her automatic due. She found it on the third day. I was in the kitchen, steeping a pot of Earl Grey, the fragrant bergamot scent a small, personal luxury. She came down the stairs, the cardigan already on. She stopped halfway to the coffee machine, her hand sliding into the pocket. I saw her fingers close around the paper. Her entire body went rigid. This time, there was no confused silence, no frantic search for the culprit. The cumulative weight of the notes, the psychological siege, had done its work. She pulled the note out, her hand trembling. She read it. And then she turned slowly to look at me. The pretense was gone. The polite mask had shattered. Her face was a canvas of pure, undiluted fear and dawning comprehension. She looked at me, not as her elderly father-in-law, but as an adversary who had outmaneuvered her completely. She took a step toward me, the note crumpled in her fist. Her voice was a tight, strained wire, barely above a whisper. "Is this you?" she asked, the English words sharp and accusing. "Are you doing this?" I did not answer immediately. I finished pouring the hot water over the tea leaves in the pot. I placed the lid on with a soft, deliberate click. I picked up my cup, a delicate china piece that had been Alara's, and turned to face her. I met her terrified gaze. I let her see the intelligence in my eyes, the calm, unyielding strength she had never bothered to look for. I saw the moment she truly saw me for the first time, Professor Heath Calder. And then I spoke. I did not raise my voice. I did not snarl or spit. I let the words leave my lips in a soft, cultured whisper, the Spanish rolling from my tongue with a native fluency and an archaic elegance that her functional vocabulary could never hope to match. Deberías haber hablado con bondad. You should have spoken kindly. I paused, letting the perfect grammatical subjunctive form, hubieras, hang in the air, a subtle display of mastery she would feel but not fully understand. I took a slow sip of my tea, my eyes never leaving hers. No haber asumido. Not assumed. The confirmation was complete. The ghost had spoken, and the sound of his voice, speaking her secret language with more authority than she could ever muster, shattered the last of her composure. The color drained from her face completely, leaving her ashen. Her jaw went slack. The crumpled note fell from her hand and fluttered to the floor. She took an involuntary step back, her hand flying to her mouth. She looked at me as if I had just removed a mask to reveal a different person underneath. Or perhaps she was finally seeing the man who had been there all along. She didn't say another word. She turned and fled the kitchen, her footsteps a frantic patter on the stairs. I bent down, picked up the crumpled note, and smoothed it out on the counter. I took another sip of my tea. The lesson had been delivered. The house fell into a deep, unnatural quiet. Morwenna retreated to her room, claiming a migraine. Garrick, sensing a cataclysm but blind to its cause, moved through the day with a confused, heavy tread. He tried to talk to her, his voice a low murmur behind their closed door, but was met with terse, monosyllabic replies. I remained in my chair, the quiet victor. The psychological victory was immense, a balm on the raw wound of their betrayal. But as the hours wore on, a practical coldness set in. I had won the battle, but the war for my future was not over. Morwenna was humiliated and terrified, but she was also proud and vindictive. This would not be the end. It was merely the end of the beginning. I needed leverage, not the fleeting power of fear, but something concrete, unassailable, something that would secure my peace permanently. And then, like a forgotten melody drifting up from the depths of memory, I heard it, the voice of my late wife, Elara, pragmatic and sharp as a tack. Heath, love, you're a dreamer. I have to be the one with her feet on the ground. That girl, there's a calculation in her eyes I don't trust. She had insisted on a prenuptial agreement. Garrick had been hurt, young and in love. Morwenna had been insulted, but Elara had been immovable. Our lawyer, a formidable woman named Saris, had drawn it up. I had signed it without truly reading it, wanting the unpleasantness to be over. I'd thought it was all about money, about protecting the family assets we were gifting them for the house. I had been wrong. I went to the old leather trunk where I kept the archives of my life. Beneath bundles of love letters and my old lecture notes, I found the document. The paper was crisp, the legal language dense. I skimmed past the sections on financial separation, my eyes searching for the clause Saris had pointed out, the one Elara had specifically demanded. And there it was, titled Clause 7, Familial Good Faith Provision. It was stunning in its specificity. It stated that the significant financial contributions made by Heath and Elara Calder toward the purchase of the primary residence were given with the explicit understanding that said residence would serve as a true family home. It further stipulated that should Heath Calder, following the passing of Elara, be made to feel unwelcome, unsafe, or subjected to a hostile living environment by any occupant, including through verbal disrespect, psychological manipulation, or social isolation, the prenuptial agreement could be rendered void at the discretion of the contributing party. A voided agreement would trigger a financial recalibration. The lump sum they'd been gifted for the down payment would become a loan. a legally enforceable, immediately callable loan. They had not just been cruel. They had been financially suicidal. Morwenna's words at the dinner table, a witnessed act of profound verbal disrespect, were the trigger. My notes were the evidence of the resulting hostile environment. I held in my hands not just a weapon, but the deed to my own liberation. I didn't need to reveal this to Morwenna. She was already broken. I needed to reveal it to the one person whose opinion still, despite everything, held a shard of power over me: my son. That evening, after a silent, excruciating dinner where Morwenna pushed food around her plate and refused to look up, I asked to speak with Garrick in the living room. Morwenna's head snapped up, her eyes wide with fresh terror. She knew what was coming. Garrick, weary and confused, followed me. "What's going on, Dad? Morwenna's a mess. Did you two have a fight?" I didn't sit. I handed him the prenuptial agreement, Clause 7 highlighted in yellow. "Read this," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. He read it. His face, initially puzzled, slowly transformed. Confusion gave way to disbelief, then to a sickening, horrified understanding. He looked from the document to me, his eyes begging for it not to be true. "The words she spoke at Eamon's birthday," I said quietly. The notes were my response. "She created the hostile environment, Garrick. She put your family's financial security, the roof over your son's head, in jeopardy because she could not be bothered to show a little human kindness to the man who helped put him there." The weight of it crushed him. He sank onto the sofa, the document falling from his hands. He wasn't looking at an angry old man. He was looking at a plaintiff with an ironclad case. "Dad, I didn't know." "That is the problem, son," I said, the word son feeling like a foreign object in my mouth. "You never bothered to look." The aftermath was not explosive. It was a quiet, seismic settling. There were no dramatic apologies from Morwenna. The shame was too deep, the fear too real. There were no tearful reconciliations with Garrick. The trust between us was a bridge that had been burned, and the chasm beneath was too wide to cross with a single conversation. What followed was a negotiation, not of words, but of space. I did not invoke Clause 7. I didn't need to. Its existence, now known to both of them, was a sword of Damocles hanging over their future. It was the ultimate leverage. I presented my terms to Garrick, man to man. I would not stay in this house, this place of such profound unhappiness, but I would not be exiled to some distant, lonely apartment either. I wanted a space of my own, on this property, a self-contained granny flat, with a separate entrance, a small kitchenette, and a view of the garden Alara had helped plan. I would use my remaining savings to build it. It would be mine, entirely, legally mine. Garrick agreed immediately. It was a penance he was eager to pay. I think he saw it as a way to keep me close without having to face the daily reminder of his failure. The construction took 2 months. During that time, I stayed in my room, a cordial ghost. Meals were quiet affairs. Morwenna and I avoided being in the same room alone. The notes had stopped, their purpose served. The silence now was not one of oppression, but of a fragile armistice. The day the flat was finished, I moved my things. It wasn't much. My clothes, my books, Alara's photo, my fountain pen, and my tea set. It was everything that mattered. I closed the door. The silence that greeted me was different. It was my silence. It belonged to me. The air smelled of new paint and fresh wood, not of another family's life. I sat in my new armchair by my new window and looked out at the garden. I could see the main house, but I felt no connection to it. It was a separate country. Garrick brings Eamon to visit. The boy loves my little flat, thinks it's a brilliant treehouse. He comes twice a week, and we read together. Those hours are untainted, a small, precious thread connecting me to the future. Garrick and I are civil. We talk about the weather, about Eamon's school, about nothing of consequence. The love is still there, I suppose, but it is a wounded thing, hibernating deep underground. Perhaps one day it will stir. Perhaps not. As for Morwenna, I see her sometimes, through the window, walking in the garden. She never looks my way. We are planets in separate orbits now, bound by gravity but never touching. This morning I made my coffee. 1 cup, I toasted my bread, 1 slice. I sat in my chair and watched the sun rise. This is not the peace I dreamed of in the early days after Alara died. That was a piece of integration, of family, of a gentle closing chapter surrounded by love. This is a different peace, a harder peace, a peace forged in the fires of betrayal and cooled in the waters of solitude. It is a peace built on the unshakable foundation of my own resilience. I am Heath Calder. I am a man of words, and with them I did not just win a war. I wrote myself a new ending. It is quieter, it is lonelier, but it is mine. Every single, solitary, dignified inch of it is mine, and for now, that is enough. It is more than enough. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share.